Alrighty, let's get started. We're going to talk about something that provides me a great deal of anxiety, and I'm not talking about public speaking. I'm not talking about standing on stage and talking to an audience. I'm talking about revenue leakage. And as a sales leader and someone who's been in sales leadership for about 20 years now, this is something that causes me a great deal of stress and anxiety. We know as leaders, entrepreneurs, that we have leaky pipeline, that we're leaking revenue on a daily, monthly, quarterly, and yearly basis. And it's much like when you notice that you have a water leak. You can see some of the signs. You can see that the ceiling is a little bit discolored, or maybe my walls, I've got a little bit of precipitation on the walls, but I don't know the magnitude and I don't know exactly where my pipe is leaking. So we're going to talk a little bit today about how to identify whether and if our pipeline is leaking. What are some of the symptoms that you have a leaky revenue pipeline? And most importantly, how might we be able to address that? How can we diagnose the leaks? And how can we put into place an action plan that will allow us not only to address the leaks, but to test and measure if those leaks are actually plugged up and if it's working? So this is an oversimplification of a customer journey. We often talk about pipeline, and in many cases, we make the mistake of thinking that pipeline is only active sales pipeline. We don't think much about what's happening on the marketing side, in the demand generation side, lead nurturing, and we don't think a lot about what happens post-sales with our customers, and are we increasing our customer base's adoption, retention, customer satisfaction, and if you're a subscription model looking for a land and expand strategy, certainly how do we expand our happy customer base? But leakage can happen anywhere in the customer journey, from the marketing side all the way over to the post-sales customer success, customer retention side. So likely this is what your pipeline actually looks like. And it's not an insignificant problem. 42% of companies are experiencing significant revenue leakage that's inhibiting growth. It's affecting somewhere between 1% and 5% of total EBITDA. The more leaks that you have in your pipeline, the greater the accumulated impact. And by the way, revenue leakage is unnoticed or unintended loss of revenue. And this is really important because oftentimes that unnoticed or unattended revenue leakage is what we're talking about here. It's problems that are happening within your customer life cycle that is preventing you from being able to reach and achieve the revenue goals that you have as an organization. This is just a couple of the symptoms that you have revenue leakage. This would be like going to WebMD and saying, hey, do I have some of these symptoms? If I have an inconsistent revenue engine, if I have limited pipeline visibility, inaccurate forecasting. It's very difficult for me to accurately forecast what we're going to do this quarter, next quarter, this year, next year. Superficial engagement with prospects, slow movement across the pipeline, incomplete customer data, ineffective sales execution, and limited sales time for reps. These are all examples, symptoms, if you will, of revenue leakage. So now let's talk about where these might creep up in that customer lifecycle. This is just a couple examples throughout the customer lifecycle of how you might be able to see, hey, I've got some revenue leakage. It would be, hey, we are only experiencing 4% conversion to MQL when industry standard is 10%. 2 out of every 30 deals are making it to that next stage. Or our NPS score is lower than we anticipated. These are all clear signs that I've got revenue leakage at marketing, sales, and customer success side of the sales journey. Now we're going to start to get into the part where it's a little bit more fun. Initially, we wanted to just talk about what is the problem and why should we address it. This is why it matters. And notice in the 2 examples that I'm about to show, we're not talking about an increase in either leads or an increase in our average deal size. All we're talking about is if you can fundamentally fix leakage across the entire customer journey, what kind of impact would that have? And this is just, in this example, it's just a 5% increase. Now this doesn't matter if you're a really small company that's growing from 1 to 5 million, if you're a company in this case that's looking to grow from 8 million plus, or if you're a larger organization or an enterprise organization. We just picked this particular example, and in this example where I'm anticipating 8.2 million, I can actually, just by fixing the leakage in my pipeline, translate to 24.5 million. That's a 3x growth in revenue. And notice, it's not changing the number of leads and it's not changing my average deal size. which we would argue if you fix your leakage, you probably are going to also see an increase in both of those categories. The billion-dollar question, how do I fix it? We all know it's happening. How do we fix it? For us, we strongly argue it starts with identification. One of the most common problems organizations have with any CRM, and we're here at Dreamforce, so Salesforce is no exception, is you buy Salesforce because you want Salesforce to be your record of truth, and you want 100% of meaningful activities to be in Salesforce. This is SDRs that are having meaningful conversations with prospects. You want them to log those notes. Sales reps who are having meaningful communication with customers. You want them to log those notes. CSMs who are having meaningful implementation conversations, talking about the value that the customer wants to achieve. You want them to log those notes. But if you require a human being to manually input those notes in Salesforce, you're never going to have 100% of those activities in Salesforce. It's a battle we've been fighting for something like 40 years, and we're losing. I see laughs and smiles. We're losing that battle. We've been trying to use carrots and sticks, and you all know the routine. Managers are going to their sales reps, log your notes. CSM managers are going to CSM, log your notes. Sometimes we put rewards for logging notes. Sometimes we try to put compensation based around logging notes. All of it has failed. The best organizations are only logging about 50 to 60% of activities. And it's not just because they're lazy. Imagine the life of a sales rep. They had 3 customer demos today. They had 15 email exchanges. They've had 10 phone conversations, 3 texts, and at the end of the 10-hour day, they have about an hour and a half of note logging. That's assuming they remember it all. They're not going to do it. And what they log is going to be incomplete. So just stop. Auto capture that meaningful communication. It does 2 things that's really, really important. Number 1, you're going to capture 100% of those meaningful activities. Number 2, you're going to have a huge productivity boost, not only to AEs, SDRs, CSMs, anyone who's customer facing, including executives, but you're also going to free up some management time to focus on areas of potential growth. Now, when we talk about auto capturing relevant activities, it's really important that we're talking about only relevant activities. When you're looking for how do I fix that, as important as getting 100% of relevant activities into Salesforce is weeding out meaningless garbage. How was your weekend? Does not need to go in Salesforce. Hey, how was the trip to the Bahamas? Does not need to go into Salesforce. When you have an email exchange, which is very common, and you reply to the email, and you reply back, not capturing the entire chain so that your notes are huge is very, very important. Once you have those meaningful activities all captured, now you can do some really interesting stuff with it. Not just from we're talking about AI side, we would highly recommend leveraging AI, but also human beings. When I have a complete picture of what's happening, what those meaningful engagements are, how many are they, and I can compare deals that we've won versus deals that we've lost, there is a huge amount of value and insight that I can gain to help build and tweak a strategy. But there is so much data there that trying to have human beings do that alone, you're going to miss things. And you're going to miss things that aren't necessarily that obvious. So we would say, analyze that data with AI, as well as human beings that can analyze that data. Now, once you've analyzed that data, this is where I would recommend you don't have AI make the recommendations. Have AI analyze the data and help us understand what's actually happening with our pipeline. But any of you who have used AI for making suggestions, you know that those suggestions are often hit or miss. The human being, the sales leader, the CSM leader, the SDR leader, the executive leader who knows your business really, really well, with that data is probably going to make better decisions on the strategy that we need to take to plug those revenue gaps, to plug that leakage. But you need a mechanism to implement those changes. It's not enough to have the strategy if you can't implement the strategy. So a mechanism that will allow you to implement that strategy, ideally for all of us Salesforce users, right in Salesforce, and then have a capability of testing and measuring. Because sometimes we'll make strategy changes as sales leaders that don't work, or worse, make it worse. So having a clear mechanism that shows when sales reps in this example have taken the strategy change, what was the impact? So that you can constantly tweak and make sure, just like in our example of the leaky pipeline, that yeah, maybe we have mitigated, but can we reduce that leakage altogether at that particular stage? So it's implementing and it's measuring the effectiveness. So let's talk a little bit deeper. When we say auto capture, and this is something that we at Revenue Grid can help you with, it doesn't have to be Revenue Grid, and I want the audience to understand that what we're talking about today is a common problem that we're looking to fix together. Certainly we can help and be a part of the solution to that problem. And one of the areas that we can help on the auto capture side is that when you're talking about getting 100% of meaningful activities, we talked a few minutes ago about how important that is. I saw lots of nods. You want 100% of meaningful activities in Salesforce. You want 0% of meaningless activities in Salesforce, but it's not just the email and the calendar. Certainly it could start and should start with email and calendar. Most likely in the B2B business world, you're setting up meetings using email and using calendar invites as the primary mechanism, and you want all of that data captured in Salesforce, for sure. But we also are communicating with Slack. We're communicating with marketing automation. We're communicating with Microsoft Teams. We're communicating with our phones. Our folks are calling in to our phone system. So when we talk about auto capture, we can literally capture any communication platform that is happening so that we can get 100% of those meaningful activities into Salesforce, and at the same time, leverage AI to weed out the garbage. Let's talk about analyzing that data. So now we've got 100% of those activities in Salesforce. There's a lot of data there. It's valuable data. But making very, very insightful identifications of revenue leakage with that massive amount of data, you need some help. So having AI help us to crunch that data, to surface up meaningful insights to sales leaders is critical. We talked about a couple of these examples earlier. Hey, if we only have 4% conversion of our leads to MQLs and industry standard is 10%, there's a huge leakage there. Let's take a deeper look as a marketing leader at why that's happening. What changes can we make to affect that particular revenue gap? On the sales side, we talked about 2 of every 30 deals making it from one stage to the next stage. Oftentimes, in the middle of the active sales pipeline, you hear sales leader talk about the graveyard. There's a graveyard. A whole bunch of opportunities sitting there for months and months and months with no back and forth with prospects. That's revenue leakage. Nothing good happens from an opportunity stagnating at any stage in the pipeline. We talked about on the post-sale side. Really, really critical to identify how happy our customers are. How well have we implemented that? What's the usage like? What's the adoption rate like? And having something that will help us identify where in our implementation cycle might we be having some delays that are causing revenue leakage from a retention, renewal, and expansion standpoint. We're going to focus a little bit on this particular example on the sales side, but this is absolutely true for marketing. It's absolutely true for customer success or anywhere in the customer journey. How do we implement changes into our sales process? I know what I need to do. I know that if I see an opportunity late stages and it's forecasted for this quarter, but we've never had a conversation with anyone in procurement, we've never had a conversation with anyone in legal, there's no way we're going to be able to close that deal with no conversation at legal or procurement. I want to make sure at this particular stage, there's a reminder that's sent out to the sales rep automatically within Salesforce that tells them you need to engage with your procurement contact right away. And then see if they took that action. Where it's tracking how long did it take for them to take that action, and did they take that action? And when they took that action, did it lead to a higher close rate? Did it lead to a higher conversion rate of this stage to the next stage? We call that signals. Now, within the Revenue Grid platform, we have a library of signals that we can help any organization if you're not sure what your strategy is, but there's absolutely the ability to customize. Leaders generally know better than either we or AI knows what signals we need to send to affect that change. So that's signals.
And you also, as we mentioned, want to measure the effectiveness of those changes. Hey, we put that process in place and we improved our conversion at the 90% stage, 15%. We had a 15% higher rate of converting folks into that stage because of that change. We know we've made the right change and we've affected that. Conversely, if that went down, I need to make that adjustment right away. So having the ability to test and measure so I can constantly make tweaks to my process is absolutely critical. And again, going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, this is the kind of impact you have from just a 5% change across the entire customer journey. In this particular example, it's a 300% difference in revenue, again, with no additional leads and no additional average deal size. All right, I'm happy to take some questions now. We covered a lot of ground there. Hopefully you found some value. Hopefully there was some interesting insights there that we intrigued you this morning, and certainly open to taking some questions from the group. Please. So the question is process changes. Can I talk a little bit more about process changes and how does Revenue Grid know if those process changes have worked? Did I get the question right? And where it made a difference. So the question is process changes. How does Revenue Grid know what kind of impact it had on the process changes and where it made a difference? So the first stage, as we talked about, was the identification of where the leakage is happening. There's reporting in our platform that helps you identify, hey, there's a problem here. And what we do is we do it by a visual notification. As you're looking through either the overall pipeline or even deal by deal, there'll be a little indicator that tells me I have a problem here. And it shows up as a red triangle. There's a problem. I mouse over and it will tell me specifically what the problem that the AI platform has identified for me. Now, when I make a change, I either set up an individual signal or I set up a process that at this stage, there's a signal that reminds the salesperson of the action I want them to take. I have a report that will allow me to see what signals did we send out and which ones were followed, and what the change is in let's say it's late stage and I'm looking at my 90% converting to deals. What was my close rate change from that particular signal? If it's early, when the example that we used, which was leads turning into MQLs, what was the percentage change of the conversion from taking that action? All righty, thanks everybody.